So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speakers. We have the absolutely incredible Abdulrahman, who is a Yemeni data scientist and peace activist. He has a degree in peace studies from Bradford University and a master's in artificial intelligence. Secondly, we have the one and only Katie Fallon, who you might recognize as the star of Don't Buy a Bomb. And she is the advocacy manager at Campaign Against the Arms Trade. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass over to you two. And I just want to quickly note that questions and comments we are going to address at the end after all of the panelists have spoken. So thank you so much for joining. We're delighted to have you both here. Over to Abdulrahman first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eva. I hope my voice is clear. Good evening, everyone. As Eva introduced me, thank you so much. My name is Abdulrahman, and yes, I do have interest in peace studies and development. And I wanted to see if I can use data analysis and machine learning to help me gag out answers when all, the big screen TV media failed to do so for me as a Yemeni who was in firsthand impacted by what was going on in Yemen. First, I want to start by appreciating this film. Don't Buy a Bomb is a powerful reminder of how decisions made far from the battlefield in boardrooms, parliaments, and arms expos can directly end lives, shatter homes, and displace generations. It's not easy to bring the story of Yemen to the world in a way that feels real, personal, and urgent. And what this film does well is shine a light on something many in this country don't see. The role that international arms sales plays in prolonging suffering, especially in conflicts like Yemen. I was especially moved that the film managed to include footage and stories from inside Yemen itself, not just secondhand reports. That alone is a huge achievement, considering that the real barriers involved censorship, safety risks, and the logistical nightmare of reporting from a war zone. However, I also want to offer a gentle but important reflection, not as a criticism, but as an invitation to expand the conversation. While the film does a great job of showing the top-down reality, bombs dropped, deals made, lives lost, it still only scratches the surface of what is happening on the ground. Yemen's war is not just a humanitarian crisis or a geopolitical chessboard. It's a complex, layered, deeply human tragedy unfolding in thousands of towns, villages, and hearts every single day. We often hear the official narratives, who's to blame, what happened and when. But there's a massive gap in our understanding of how ordinary Yemenis feel and think about the powers involved, including the Houthis, the coalition, and the international actors. To try and bridge this gap, I've been working with a small group of peers using AI to analyze online sentiments from Yemen and other locations in the world, using comments, posts, digital conversations in English, in Arabic, and other languages, shared publicity. What we found is that the public emotions shift constantly from frustration with the Houthis' local control to exhaustion from the Saudi airstrikes that were happening at the time to skepticism about foreign aid to glimpses of hope during ceasefire. These stories, as scattered and as fragile as they are real. They don't fit into a headline, but they deserve to shape how we talk about intervention, peace building, and policy. Of course, there are challenges to collecting this kind of grassroots data. Media restrictions within Yemen, lack of internet access, and fear of speaking openly makes it nearly impossible to gather full picture. But I believe it's worth the effort, and I believe technology, when used ethically, can help us listen to voices that have been ignored for far too long. Now, also, I would like to talk about the role of the UK, not just as a distant observer, but as a very real participant in the Yemen conflict. Since 2015, the UK has provided more than 1 billion in humanitarian aid to Yemen. That's commendable and absolutely necessary. But in that same period, the UK has approved at least 8 billion, and some estimates go up to 30 billion in arms exports to the Saudi-led coalition. This includes missiles, aircraft components, and have been directly linked to attacks to civilian infrastructure. It's hard to reconcile these two roles. On one hand, funding aid to save lives, on the other, fueling the machinery that ends them. If we're serious about supporting peace in Yemen and other locations and areas as we can see in the world right now, then our policies must be coherent. We can't be both firefighters and arsonists. Finally, I want to end with a personal reflection on that, one that goes beyond Yemen. I often hear people say, we have our own problems to worry about. We can't save the whole world. And I understand that sentiment. Every country has challenges. Every citizen deserves safety and opportunity. But in a deeply interconnected world, turning inwards doesn't actually protect us. It isolates us. We saw this during COVID. We saw it now in global energy markets and trade disruptions. And even on a more personal level, look at how figures like Elon Musk and the President Donald Trump, who once seemed to align on an America First agenda, eventually clashed when their personal interest no longer matched. Self-interest does not scale. Eventually, it fractures. True strength for individuals, for nations, for communities comes from shared responsibility, from looking outwards, listening deeply, and acting not just when it's convenient, but when it's right. So tonight, I stand here not just as a Yemeni or a refugee or a data scientist or a person who supports peace. I stand here as someone who believes we must all tell deeper stories, include harder truths, and commit to policies that reflect our shared humanity. Thank you very much.
Lots of love pouring in for you there, Abdulrahman. I hope you can see the emojis. I'll pass it over to Katie now. Thank you so much for that. And like I said, we'll have a chance to hear from Abdulrahman again at the end in the discussion. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva. Just check you can hear me all right. Great, thanks. Yeah, God, there's so much to watching that back. I think before I go any further, I just want to echo kind of what you said at the beginning, that like I can't really think of a day or a week that hasn't felt very heavy for the last couple of years, in just seeing how much destruction and uh, death has been implemented, like lives have been taken from people in the Middle East specifically, in by our governments, by the people who are supposed to represent us here in the West. But this week feels particularly horrendous, I think, on top of many other horrendous weeks. So yeah, I just wanted to share my solidarity with anyone who's personally affected by that, by what's happening in Iran and beyond. Um, I think for, kind of, yeah, I'll just give like a quick update, like logistically on where we are, and then I might go back and talk about some of the things that came out of the Yemen judgment, because they reflect kind of how I feel about the film now as well, in that, I remember doing the interview with you right after, I think we did it immediately after the hearings in 2023. And, one of the reasons why we wanted to do it was because this is an important piece of work for people to know about going forward. We were, discussed at the time. It's an important story, and as well because the legal system is kind of slightly hidden from the public's view. A lot of the time, it was a way of making it more accessible. But it like it's very moving and also upsetting to see how poignant the film is today, and how it's kind of resonating in so many different ways with other things that are happening that we had no idea that would be the way that they are now. So I feel like that about the whole film, but also kind of just in terms of the actual judgment and some of the things that we pulled out of it at the time. I feel the same, especially about Gaza. So we kind of, based on the legal advice that we got, we decided not to appeal the judgment that we ended up getting in June 2023 for our second judicial review. This was because it seemed like we weren't going to get permission even if we tried to appeal. And just kind of a legal consideration that we all, like, you generally should bear in mind with these types of cases, is that if you take a case where it gives the judge a lot of room to provide a judgment that gives the government even more power to ignore international law, you just need to be careful about how you weigh that up. So even in the Al Haq case last week, that is something that kind of appeared, mentioning different judgments where it went against maybe civil society and expanded the remit of what the government is allowed to do. So that was one of our considerations with it. But Muatna did appeal, and we supported them, but didn't get permission. So that's kind of where the case, we weren't able to go any further with this particular judicial review. And that would have been in June 2023. So we're kind of just as an organization thinking about how to like go forward after that. And then of course like October 2023. And since then our focus has been on Gaza, but also on this exact same system. So in terms of like policy and advocacy, it's the exact same problems that we're addressing. And I think that's one of the things that is the most like I can't even the right word, maddening maybe about this whole system, because everything that was needed to be in place for the genocide in Gaza was already there for years. And part of it is this arms export system. This is one part of it, but it's the system itself and then the kind of the power structures around it that allow these types of things to happen on purpose to serve vested interests and kind of Western hegemony, which is inherently genocidal. I think we've just seen now it taken to its like worst conclusion. But the reasoning was the same here. So just like a couple of things I wanted to highlight from the judgment that we did get in June 2023. Like one of the things I found the most galling in it was the phrase like margin of error appeared 5 times in our judgment, or well, margin, and then kind of consistent with a limited number of errors. So this was like a decision paper that came after our first judicial review from inside government, where they kind of were saying, okay, we've done a review and now actually we've gone back and changed the process, or we've taken new processes and everything is fine. So the judge kind of quoted that and said, yeah, the detail of the possible IHL breaches or international humanitarian law, these are consistent with a limited number of errors well within the margin that would be expected in a conflict of this nature. And I think you had like a tweet from Phil that basically he was referencing this exact bit of the government's argument at the time, which was before the judgment, but the judge obviously picked up on it. How can you say that there is no clear risk of IHL violations when you're also saying that this is in the margin of error of IHL violations that we're expecting? So you're expecting unlawful deaths, which may include war crimes. This isn't a legal concept, the idea that there's going to be this IHL breach. This is just something that the government has come up with, and that the judge said, yeah, sure, we're all expecting the civilians in Yemen to die because of the actions that the coalition is taking, that we're supporting 100% by providing all of the arms. Yeah, like I think that something that I really learned going through these judgments and working at CAT as well is that and I think the kind of question that this event has posed is like, what do we need to do for accountability, is not to believe that like a judge or a government lawyer or a barrister knows something special that you don't. Like when you just read through the judgment and you see, God, this factually doesn't really make much sense, it's because it doesn't. It's not because they have some specialist knowledge that we don't have. When we were talking about the pattern of IHL violations, which we were kind of saying the record of Saudi's compliance shows that it is not committed to IHL, because we have all these examples of all of these different violations. They're not just incidents, they're not just isolated incidents. And then in the judgment, they said, oh, it's too much of a leap to say that such a commonality must be concerning a pattern. And I remember reading that paragraph and okay, well, what's his next paragraph where he's going to describe why exactly this is too much of a leap? Obviously, I'm disagreeing with it anyway, but then there was nothing. It just went on to a new topic, a different headline. So that's the kind of thing that a judge can put in a judgment, and that's part of that is part of the legal system. I think two other quick things that I wanted to highlight were numbers, and I think the margin of error thing that kind of resonates a bit with what's happening in Gaza, but say when they spoke about numbers in the judgment, and a lot of this was referencing that decision paper taken by government. It said, so this was the judge, whilst care must be taken in drawing comparisons across different conflicts, as the decision paper said, it is to be noted that in the Syria-Iraq conflict, where a similar number of airstrikes were carried out, a similar number of allegations were recorded against coalition forces. And then they said the fact that the number of possible breaches was so small compared with the number of airstrikes, it could be rationally relied on as a source of comfort that there were not such systemic weaknesses, only individual errors. So this idea that there is this right number of IHL violations and that they're pretty sure that this is within it, even though, again, there's no basis for that anywhere. That's just a construction. that this is going to be some source of comfort to who precisely when these violations and atrocities take place, and just classifying it, saying, no, these aren't systemic weaknesses. And now when we look at what are the numbers, what are the acceptable numbers now in Gaza? Is it 30,000, 60,000, 100,000? There is no number apparently that would make them stop exports or actually admit that war crimes have taken place. The last thing I just wanted, and just one other little thing to highlight from that, it was, another thing that the judge said is to conclude from the fact of the previous assessment. So after they did after the government did this decision paper, more potential violations kept happening. And we kind of said, well, that shows that your assessment is incorrect, because how can these violations continue to happen if you assess that there's no clear risk of them happening? And the judge said, it would be inappropriate application of hindsight to do special caution and vigilance this time around. So those are just some of the things that show what these types of judgments will include. And I hope Gimby gives the audience a bit of insight into what it's not just the kind of rational legal arguments, it's kind of an ideology that penetrates these types of cases, and what a judicial review is, and what the relationship is between the legal system and government, and how our laws support the government being able to take the actions that they want to. It's not just the law, it's kind of, an ideology. I don't have too much time left, but I think I just wanted to say a few things about the last kind of 2 years and the Al Haq case judicial review, which just took place in May. Some of the things so we're waiting, probably will be in the next month or so, definitely within 2 months, we will get a judgment on that. So that is focused on the F-35 program, and the case is focusing on that the government have created this new carve-out that has never existed previously, where they've admitted the threshold has been crossed. We believe these the components for these jets are likely to be used, or there's a clear risk that they will be might be used in IHL violations, which is just, I think that's not something we really were conceiving of maybe back when we were doing this case in 2023. But two things just to highlight from that. The one thing that's really important is when we were doing our case on Yemen, we found that there was, and I know I'm just going a bit over time, Eva, so I'll wrap up quickly. We learned about the tracker, and that the government actually had been tracking cases, but it hadn't been assessing them. So we have 500 plus potential violations, but we're not actually going to assess whether they're violations or not. So this was in Yemen. For about half of those, they said they didn't have enough information to make a decision either way. Now they have more than 400 different potential possible violations of IHL that they've been tracking, that they were asked so many times by MPs and wouldn't tell them if they were or weren't. It came out in the case. And for 99% of those, they've said they don't have enough information to even make a judgment as to whether it's a likely violation of IHL. The only one violation that they have admitted is potentially a violation, so it's still not even really that affirmative, is the World Kitchen Strike, which is one of the few ones where no Palestinians were killed. So the government's position right now is that they won't confirm or even say that it's likely that a single airstrike has contributed to a single unlawful Palestinian death in Gaza. That's their position. But kind of seeing what they've come out and how my last very quick thing of their position on genocide, I think just makes it absolutely crystal clear how morally bankrupt and apparent their position is. So, I just have a couple of bullet points just to summarize that, and then I'll finish. It's, the government, so this is in court. I've been working with MPs for the last 2 years, asking for, they've asked MPs, the ones that are working on this have been great, and they've asked all the right questions, been stonewalled by government, but in court and through their papers, they admit that there's a clear risk that these components might be used in serious violations. The government can give no red line as to the number and the gravity of crimes that Israel can commit with these F-35s. They said it's a matter of such gravity, according to their own analysis of international peace and security, that it would override any further breaches of IHL. They think it's there's a tenable view that no genocide is occurring. That's their kind of how they've phrased it. And they believe that the F-35 stealth bomber jets dropping 2,000-pound bombs wouldn't make any difference to the possibility of Israel committing genocide in Gaza, so it's fine to keep exporting. They don't believe it would even have a deterrent effect, even if a genocide was happening. So that's kind of how depraved your rationale has to be to keep arguing that we should be sending those parts. And I know that's maybe, yeah, we'll have a bit more time to maybe talk about constructive ways to go forward, but I just think it's important that people know, like, that's where you go legally to defend these kind of positions. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for raising the case about arms sales to Israel as well. Just to break up the event a little bit, we're going to show another short film. It's not as long as the first one. This one is just 5 minutes. And it contains some speeches outside of the Royal Court of Justice on the day of that hearing, which was only a month ago. It is part of a longer film, which I will attach the link to in the chat. But for the sake of time, we've just cut it down. But I will start sharing that now. Hopefully we can all see that. In the longer film, there is very impassioned speeches from Jeremy Corbyn and Juliet Stevenson. So yeah, please do check that out when you've got the time. But this is just to lay a little bit of context about this recent case.
When we demanded an end to supply of parts for the F-35 jets, Keir Starmer went there and rather bizarrely said, there's lots going on here I'm not able to talk to you about. I think it's time that he was in front of a court where he'd be forced to answer those questions.
We're here today because the UK government continues to supply weapons to Israel, even as it commits relentless and ruthlessly imposes famine on Gaza. What is happening in Gaza defies belief. Leading jurists, legal experts and scholars across the UK and internationally have been clear. This is textbook genocide. Just last week, Joseph Borrell, the EU's former top diplomat, called it such and described it as the largest ethnic cleansing operation since the Second World War. We are seeing families burned alive in tents, amputations without anesthesia, and children's malnourished bodies no longer able to heal from the wounds inflicted on them by Israel. Orphans are surviving alone amongst the ruins, and entire families are being annihilated in their homes. And yet, the UK government invokes international peace and security to justify sending parts for Israel's warplane of choice, the F-35. How can the arming of a genocide contribute to international peace and security? Whose peace and security do these weapons serve? In his former life as a human rights lawyer, Keir Starmer was himself arguing in front of the International Court of Justice in 2014 that genocide had been committed by Serbia against Croatia between 1991 and 1995. And he described in his own words, and I quote, a sustained campaign of shelling, systematic expulsion, denial of food, water, electricity, sanitation, and medical treatment, bombing, burning, brutal killings, and torture which reduced buildings to rubble and destroyed its population. Those words could easily describe the situation in Gaza now. And yet today, as a political leader, Starmer refuses to admit what is clear, that the crime of crimes is occurring in Gaza. So we gather here today, outside the Royal Courts of Justice, to reject these legal absurdities and affirm what jurists, scholars, and genocide experts around the world already recognize. Gaza is enduring a genocide, and a state like the UK have to end their support for Israel. Whatever the court decides, we are here to say to Keir Starmer and his colleagues, through your military support for Israel, you are complicit. Yes. Yeah. You will be held to account. We are proud to support Al-Haq in bringing this case, and we thank the public, all of you, for standing on the side of justice. Thank you.
the UK government is complicit in the killing of children. As someone who lost over 80 members of his family, I'm here to tell the British government that the blood of our children is in their hands, that the weapons that they send to Israel is tearing our children apart every day, that the military cooperation they have is starving our children to death. You heard some testimonies. It's just the tip of the iceberg of the things that we've been documenting at Al-Haq. Anything you would hear about the situation supposed to shock human consciousness, yet the British government acts as they don't see or understand the situation. But the most important message here, I think that despite everything we've been through, despite the loss, the pain, the agony, the dehumanization by the Israeli government, but also by the British government, by extension, by continuing these arms exports, despite all of this dehumanization, we refuse but to hold on to our humanity. We refuse but to show up here and believe in justice. We refuse but to believe in the rule of law. The UK government prides itself as a bastion of liberty, democracy, and international law. It prides itself as one of the architects of the world order that we had after World War II, as the protector of the promise of never again. Well, now they're actually not honoring this promise. We're here to tell the British government what they're doing is not only betrayal to the Palestinian people and their rights, it's also a betrayal to the promise of never again. Starmer, his government, and the previous government, they're complicit in the crimes against the Palestinian people. They have blood of Palestinian children on their hands, and history will not be kind to them, and they're failing humanity, and again, they're failing the promise of never again. Thank you.
So really powerful speeches there from the lawyers involved in the case, which had the judicial review, which had its hearing last month. As Katie said, we don't know the outcome of that case. It will probably be about a month, I think you said, until we might hear something. So please do stay updated and support that struggle. So now I'm going to introduce the second two speakers for the second half of this event. We're very lucky to have John McEvoy, the chief reporter at Declassified UK, with us, and Emma Sangster, the founder and researcher at ForcesWatch. Both of these two individuals have done extensive work uncovering the depth of military and political ties with the UK and Israel. I am going to pass over to John first to share some contributions about his work, and then we will go over to Emma. So thank you for joining. I'll pass over to John now.
Well, thanks very much, Eva. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to just build on some of the things that Katie said about that case, about the F-35 case that is going through the UK courts at the moment. Because I was in court for this case. I was at the Royal Courts of Justice last month to witness some of the proceedings, and I mean, some of the things that I heard the UK government's lawyers argue in court were absurd and maddening. So as Katie mentioned, the UK government's position is that there's no tenable evidence that a genocide is occurring in Gaza, nor that Israel is deliberately targeting women or children. It's also argued that the UK government does have a duty to prevent genocide. However, that duty to prevent genocide is only engaged when a genocide has been proven by the competent court, so one of the international courts. And as we know very well, it's going to take many, many years, if not decades, until the competent courts actually decide whether what is happening, what we all know is happening in Gaza, is a genocide. And that effectively relieves the UK government of its obligations to prevent genocide. It kind of inverts the definition of prevention altogether. And so that was quite an incredible thing to hear the UK government's lawyers argue in court. And I think that's a first as well of that argument being tested out. One of the other maddening things that the UK government's lawyers argued was that the position is effectively that Israel is not committed to complying with international humanitarian law, but they've only made that decision based on the treatment of detainees in Gaza, and the lack of access to aid. They still haven't pronounced on whether Israel's general war conduct, the relentless bombing campaigns, ground incursions, death zones. They haven't actually pronounced on whether the general war conduct means that Israel is not committed to complying with international humanitarian law. And one of the reasons that they're able to do this, and this is what the lawyers argued in court, they repeated a few different times, this is not our war. Britain is not involved in this war. It's not our war. Therefore, we don't have access to the kind of intelligence that the Israeli military is using for target acquisition, targeting, and so on and so forth. And therefore, when there's a certain massacre or a certain atrocity, the UK government goes to the Israelis and they ask them, are you willing to hand over, your intelligence or the intelligence that you used to carry out this massacre? And if the Israelis say no, then they just say, well, we don't have, sufficient evidence to pronounce on whether it was a violation of international humanitarian law. So rather than looking at the kind of general conduct, genocidal conduct of Israel, and they're basically looking at it in a case by case basis. And with each case, they simply ask the Israelis, well, did you massacre a civilian population on purpose? Generally, they will say no. And so the UK government says, well, I suppose we'll conclude that it wasn't a violation of international humanitarian law. But the other key point here is this very much is Britain's war. Britain has been sending spy flights over Gaza on an almost daily basis for the past 20 months. At Declassified recorded that, over 500 spy flights, RAF spy flights have been sent over Gaza. They've, collected thousands of hours worth of surveillance footage over the Strip. We've had arms sales as campaign against the arms traders highlighted so well. The F-35 issue is very important as well because it's not simply the case that the UK is exporting F-35 components to global pools, which are then onward exported to Israel. Many of the F-35, all of the F-35 components prior to September 2024, which were exported directly to Israel, were exported from an RAF airbase in Norfolk called RAF Marham. So you have the British military forces are actively engaged in the sale of arms to the IDF, and specifically the F-35s. And that's before we even kind of talk about the intelligence agencies, so MI6 and GCHQ, which has kind of spying facilities all across the region, including in Cyprus, where the spy flights are taken off from, including in Oman. So yeah, I mean, this is very much a British war, even if the UK government's tried to deny that in court. Now, still on that point of the UK government's lawyers saying this is not our war, and they therefore don't have the intelligence to know whether Israel is committing violation of international humanitarian law. What the Foreign Office kind of has is a cell where it analyzes various different data from the ICC, from British embassies, from NGOs, from human rights organizations, in order to try and figure out, whether Israel is complying with international humanitarian law. And now, one of the key kind of evidential bases that they have not consulted the Foreign Office is the spy flights. They haven't requested from the Ministry of Defence any of the surveillance footage, the thousands of hours of surveillance footage. We're talking about a whole archive of evidence of genocide here. Now, the Foreign Office doesn't even want to look at it when it's trying to figure out whether Israel is committing war crimes. And clearly, the reason for this is to provide ministers with a decent amount of plausible deniability that they knew precisely what was going on. And they probably have the greatest, the largest archive of evidence outside of Israel of what is happening on the ground in Gaza, and yet they're saying we don't have information about what's happening on the ground in Gaza. We can't make a decision. So it's quite incredible position that a logical and legal position, not that the UK government has kind of tied itself into here. The final thing I wanted to talk about quite briefly is that the UK government has suspended direct shipments or exports of F-35 components to Israel, but it's still allowing them to go into global pools which supply Israel, and that's what the whole legal case is about. But Declassified yesterday, we revealed that F-35 components have been exported via a UK airport, via London Stansted Airport, to Israel post suspensions. This happened just last month. So what we've found basically is that Britain is still directly facilitating the global supply chain of F-35 components to Israel, even though it's claiming that it's kind of extracted itself from that supply chain. So I think that these findings put ministers in quite a vulnerable position, basically, because they've admitted that F-35s can be used to commit international atrocities in Gaza, and yet we still have those parts going through the UK. So I think that should open up some more ground, basically, to put pressure on the UK government to halt all arms sales to Israel. So I'll finish up there.
Thank you, John. And on the Eventbrite page, and I'm sure in the comments we can attach as well, you can see more of John's investigative reporting on this. So finally, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Emma, who is going to give us a short presentation about the UK-Israel roadmap. And then we will open up to your questions and discussion. Just before that, I want to flag that I've spoken to the panelists, and we kind of anticipated that it might slightly overrun. So we will stay up until 7:45 if that is necessary. So yeah, feel free to leave before that if you want, but just to let you know, we'll try and make sure that we allow enough time to answer questions as well. So over to Emma.
Thanks, Eva. Yeah, we wanted to do a little presentation here about the roadmap, because it's something that has not received the attention that it needs. I've actually prepared a little presentation just to make sure I cover all the points. So I'll try and share that. Okay. Is that visible to people? Thank you.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, so sorry if you're seeing all my screen around it, but anyway, just to zip through this. I'm gonna have to go. Oh, sorry.
We've got it in full screen now. It looks good.
So okay, thank you.
Be able to get to the next.
That one, yeah, great. Sorry about that. Okay, so the roadmap, as we are calling it for brevity, is a kind of statement of intent, really, about the future relationship between the UK and Israel. But it also does cover existing partnership or cooperation agreements, and those that are in development right now. It covers a huge array of things, from defence and security, tech and cyber, and I've put those in the same point because they are obviously very linked. Economic and trade agreements, other things in the sort of science area, health developments, and things like responses to the climate crisis, culture and education initiatives, and it even mentions things like gender equality as things that the two countries will cooperate on. This is a picture of the Foreign Secretary of the time and from the two countries signing the agreement in March 2023. So it was signed by the previous government, but there's been absolutely no indication that the current government is not going to just continue with the roadmap. Now, there aren't that many details, really. If you look at the document, and I'll share the link in the chat afterwards, that's on the government website, there's almost nothing written for some of the areas. Other areas like defence, there is more to say, and that's partly because the agreements have already been in place for some years. But it covers things like strategic dialogue, as it says here, but strategic planning, training and exercises, and a whole load of other things to do with counterterrorism and just generally military development, and what's called identifying transformational defence and security capabilities, which is kind of novel technologies in the defence arena. There's also quite a lot about cyber and technology, and these are obviously becoming core parts of defence and the sort of military realm, and also areas where the UK is very keen to sort of increase industry in here and growth, and there's a lot of language about investment and jobs included in the roadmap. Also, another aspect is the kind of ideological commitments. There's a lot of rhetoric about the free market, about democracy. This quote here talks about democracy is the finest form of government. Well, that is possibly true, but it's not something that either country is particularly living up to. And certainly in terms of how this roadmap has evaded political scrutiny in this country, suggests that there's a massive deficit democratically there. And since the roadmap was signed in early 23, and before October 23, even then there were differences, such as the UK government did appeal to the Israeli government around settlement expansion, but also expressed concerns about the constitutional changes that the Israeli government were planning to bring in. But basically, the extent of the roadmap does indicate that the support for Israel is unconditional. And I think the way that's been, the lack of debate around it in Parliament has very much illustrated that. And there's also a lot of rhetoric about Iran, which is very pertinent for now, and about mutual priorities. So there's a lot of kind of euphemistic language in the roadmap. When it was signed, the Palestinian ambassador to the UK spoke of his utmost dismay that this was the course of action that the UK government was taking, and he said it leaves no recourse to international bodies for Palestinians. Yeah, and obviously since then events have massively escalated. There has been some questions in Parliament, but really very few. And when they are raised in parliamentary debates, the minister who happens to be on the floor at the time just kind of shuts them down or just ignores them. So it has been no scrutiny at all in Parliament about the roadmap. But that doesn't mean that there aren't MPs who are asking questions. And Kenny McCaskill has asked a few, and this one, why are we in a military pact with military forces that carry out such actions? in relation to Gaza, but that received no answer. So just to sum up quickly, we did write a long piece about this on our website. Again, I'll share the link with a lot more detail. But our concerns really are, I mean, we do work around partnerships and the kind of what the consequences or the implications are of defence partnerships in particular between the UK government and other nations. For example, Starmer announced earlier this year a 100-year partnership with Ukraine, which is both kind of absurd, but also quite worrying what that actually, what the consequences of that could actually be. And again, you know, what are the consequences of this kind of long-term entwining of the UK and Israeli interests at kind of every level, if the roadmap pans out as it's written? That has had no debate, but it's something that the government of the day back in 23 and now signs up to. You know, obviously we're seeing massive political constraints, whether or not it's a function of the roadmap. It's not clear, but the roadmap kind of sets the framework for such political constraints to play out. So the interdependence of the military, UK military with the Israeli military, the arms, the tech industry, what's that going to mean for future militarism, future political decisions? What's the effect now? Of course, we're seeing that. And David Lammy's recent announcements that, you know, he'll suspend the trade negotiations with Israel, again, kind of meaningless. And he never even mentioned the wider roadmap that is behind the trade negotiations. And lastly, one aspect of the roadmap is that the UK would work within the UN to limit the scrutiny of the UN and other international bodies around Israeli policy. So it is explicitly undermining international organizations, and that is kind of written into it. I'll just leave you with this final mention of the roadmap. It hasn't been mentioned much in the media at all, or even in sort of much of the other sort of debate about what's happening at the moment. But it was mentioned in two lawyers' letters, one from last year and one from this, signed by hundreds of lawyers and legal academics and others in the legal profession, around what the government is to do to act in accordance with its international legal obligations. And out of 5 points, one of them mentioned that the roadmap needs to be suspended because of its kind of the way it directly leads to violations of international humanitarian law. Okay.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you for shining a light on this partnership, which we hear very little about. So thank you for sending in questions throughout and for staying with us. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to just take this question first because I think Abdulrahman would be quite well suited to answering it. It says, in a world where public trust is eroding and traditional oversight mechanisms are falling short, could emerging technologies such as AI, blockchain, or digital audit trails play a meaningful role in increasing transparency and real-time public scrutiny. So yeah, anyone who feels they could speak to that. We're going to try and keep answers as brief as possible because we're pushed for time, but we'll be here until 1:45. So yeah, if we can keep it short, but I understand there's a lot to be said on all of these questions. So thank you.
Wanted to give a chance for anyone to go. Well, my main interest is in tech and how it can help. I believe the experts that came in, as you can see, their contribution was live, which is something very commendable. I think as public trust declines and traditional oversight fails, emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, and digital audit trails can help shift power towards transparency. AI can detect unethical patterns. Blockchain can secure records and trace arms supply chains, and digital audit trails can enable real-time public oversight, not just after the fact reports. But tech alone is not enough. It must be open source, public facing, and built with accountability in mind. If governments can't self-regulate, oversight must come from independent citizens' bodies, civic tech groups, investigative journalists, and communities affected by these decisions. And accountability must be a shared system, open by design, ethical in practice, and resistant to political manipulation. I also want to add that this is something it could be a question more than an addition, is that I noticed in my research is that what is being shown rarely reflects what the general public is thinking about. In another analysis that we did using AI, we looked after the comments and the emotions of people, whether they are in support of the BDS movement, the boycott, diversity, and sanctions movement, or not. And I noticed something interesting is that every comment, there were comments that were critiquing the movement or even in support of the opposition, and but every all the comments were extensively with the movement itself. And when I used to search for videos and comments, opposing it, the comments were regularly turned off. And that got me the feeling that I don't think there are as many voices are heard from the general public. We just think that we're being represented by the best people, the leaders, but I doubt that as much. So I wonder if AI, if technology will enable voices of individuals to actually become louder and grow. As we know, people can go viral much faster, and it can have a much bigger impact than in the past, where individuals were just numbers. So that is something I'm hopeful for also. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. So there is a question here. Oh, I've lost it now. It was about the legal system, saying we know that legal system is compromised, going round loops, wasting time and energy, and illegal actions where no one is hurt, disturbing the illegal arms trade. Could you have an argument that the current legal system is not sufficient and other avenues need looking at? So I don't know if perhaps Katie or someone else might feel like they could talk to that.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I have that fan. I was having the fan on while I was not talking. Yeah, so I actually, even though I was very critical of the judgment, a strong believer that we do need to take legal action. And I went to see Blinani Grawley, who was the barrister for South Africa in the genocide case against Israel, do a talk. I think it was like 2 summers ago, where she said something really, like, I thought quite profound, where she was like, law is politics. Like, it is another form of politics. It's a different setting, but it's not something different. So it's one of the many avenues. We basically need to tackle them all. I think one of the huge benefits of the legal kind of side of things is that we get more information. And for some reason, I mean, it really should be Parliament that the government are answerable to, because they're our representatives, but we will get more information out of government through legal system, and that's kind of been the case for the last couple of years, like 10 years basically through our two Yemen cases and the Al Haq case. But I would definitely not say that it's enough. Like it has to be in the streets. It has to be people lobbying their MPs, direct action. And I think if I can kind of maybe tie this question together with another one, where I've just seen someone has said, and it kind of maybe connects a bit. Well, I think definitely lobby your MP because it is absolutely worth it. All of the MPs I talk to, even if they don't agree with, the ones that agree are like, say, I've never had so many comments or like so much correspondence about this. Even if your MP is like the worst person ever, it's still worth adding your name so that they can't pretend that they didn't know. But just there where someone has said, like, what can we do now? We all feel very small and powerless to stop these genocides. And I know that feeling and like I share it with you too. It's not that I don't feel like that. I'll say like any little like chink that we make in this armor, any like kind of crack in these bricks, like we're essentially going up against US military industrial complex. Like that's what it comes down to. And our government's kind of deference to that. That's kind of why the F-35s are still going, basically. So when you're going up against something that powerful financially and militarily and politically, the fact that we're making any headway, the fact that we got any suspension at all is actually huge when it's just basically based on people power and really small organizations. And then to kind of make that in like a bigger way, like I feel like this has been like a really like terrible and unwanted education for everybody on like how a genocides happen and how they're sustained across like the global infrastructure that has to be in place. And it's not just logistical or military, it's financial, it's kind of our whole, I thought Emma's your presentation really spoke to this, like our positions as people that are oppressed by capitalism and colonialism, both like we're, I think, not equally, but also oppressed by it, or we would be able to stop this or be able to stop our government's contribution to it in our name. And war. And I think it's very overwhelming to think, oh my God, we actually have to try and change all of this. But I think it's just making chinks. And I think like little kind of cracks, and financialization is maybe one of those big places where kind of the powers that be wouldn't be able to sustain this if they didn't have all the power. And I do think that this could be a time when that actually changes. So whether it's kind of your pension, all those other like maybe seemingly more complicated but boring things, like those are places to really push. So I hope that was helpful.
Thank you, Katie.
So I was just wondering if I could add to what Katie was saying. Yeah, I agree with what Katie said. I know people can get really frustrated with the kind of traditional formal routes not seeming to bear fruit, like the legal process or parliamentary process. And I mean, like as a journalist, we're often trying to find out information through Parliament, endless parliamentary questions, which either just get rejected outright or you get, some kind of nonsense template answer where they don't answer the question whatsoever. And through these legal cases, like particularly I didn't work so much on Yemen, but I'm sure it was the same case. But particularly for me during the Global Legal Action Al Haq case, the amount of information that these lawyers and human rights organizations are able to get out of the courts from the government is really unprecedented compared to what we're able to get elsewhere. So I think obviously it's frustrating to see the government kind of stonewall in court and in parliament, but these processes are really important because they also force the government into corners where they have to resort to these kind of absurd kind of contradictions in their own reasoning, where they have to admit things in court they're going to kind of stick with those people for the rest of their lives, right? But it's not either or, right? I mean, there are other methods. I mean, I think Palestine Action is one of the most impressive and impactful direct action movements in the world, right? I mean, they're kind of circumventing all of that and going straight to the arms and destroying them. And I think that's a beautiful thing to do, particularly how extreme the violence is in Gaza at the moment. And I mean, the other thing that we've seen, particularly in the last kind of couple of weeks, is we've been able to show through shipping documents, we've been able to kind of track where shipments of arms to Israel are going before they actually leave ports. And so journalists can kind of publish or collaborate with trade unions in the ports. And we've seen this happen all over Europe and in the US, and they've kind of blocked that specific cargo. So people are getting inventive, and they're using unprecedented and quite unique ways of doing this. And I think both of these kind of elements work hand in hand, basically.
Thanks for that. Yeah, we are aware that like a kind of big focus of the event, we wanted to kind of ask the question about, what can we do about it? Somebody posted a question about feeling very small in the face of, as Katie, put it, as the military industrial complex or genocide, the powers. So yeah, it would be really good if perhaps we could speak a little bit more to that in terms of what we can do and how we can help to support these struggles, whether that be the legal cases themselves or just supporting anti-war resistance more generally. So I'm going to maybe end on a note from Emma and anyone else who wishes to speak to that point. And I'm really sorry we haven't managed to get to all of the questions, but I think we've covered quite a few of them. And yeah, I will pass it over to you. And thank you to everyone for joining today.
I just wanted to mention quite an interesting legal case that's happening at the minute. Over 20 years later, as it were, it's a case involving people who ended up incarcerated at Guantanamo Bay, and it's about what UK intelligence knew at the time and supplied to the US, aiding and abetting that incarceration. And a lot of the evidence that the hearing is looking at is from documents gathered together by Unredacted, who are an organisation at the University of Westminster, sort of pulling together a lot of documentary evidence in a kind of open source way. And that information is proving crucial to looking at that issue again all these years later. I mean, obviously that's not much help for people who are the situation are sort of that are so, where there's a crisis right now, but it does speak to the importance of that work. But if we'd like to share this video by email, and also any ideas that have come up in the chat and questions that people have for further action or things that are already happening, things to support, campaigns, things that need funding. So do put any ideas that you want to mention in the chat, and we'll take them out and compile them into an email.
Someone has asked if you could link the case on the chat if possible. I guess we can do it in a follow-up email as well.
Yeah, I don't have it down, but
okay.
It out. Yeah.
Somebody in the audience does have a raised hand. Let me see. Let me find that person. Robin Colon. Oh, they've put their hand down now. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining. If everyone is happy to end it there, we will. And yeah, please stay in touch. I've put links to all of our organizations in the chat where you can read regular updates and information about events and how to get involved. And yeah, like we said at the start, just keep all eyes on the big conflicts which are happening, but also the places where perhaps the mainstream media isn't reporting, and work such like Declassified UK cover that as well. So yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, goodbye.